The Balkans are of secondary importance to the United States and to Russia, but in different ways. However, it's an area that has a way of sucking in great powers, to the regret. And the Balkans is an area where the two powers are in competition and will be in competition going forward. U.S. interest, frankly, is to continue to demonstrate its own leadership and to convey the notion of democracy, rule of law, all the Western values that the Americans have been pushing on the place for the last 35 years, but also to retain a sense of leadership.
Speaking about Russia's main interests and priorities in the Western Balkans, the first one is to preserve the investments it has made in the region, mostly in the energy sector. And actually in this aspect Russia feels quite safe, that it's quite doable to preserve these investments. The second one is more complicated because Russia wants to forestall the expansion of NATO and the European Union in the region. It doesn't see a direct military threat from Montenegro's or North Macedonia's membership in NATO. Rather, it fears that NATO expansion will go on after Balkan countries to other parts of the world, and first of all to the post-Soviet space, to countries like Moldova, Ukraine or Georgia, and these countries are indeed vital for Russia's security. Officially, Russia declares that it has nothing against the expansion of the European Union in the Balkans. It has objections only to the NATO expansion. But in reality, we see that Russia also opposes the expansion of the European Union, because as soon as the Balkan countries, and above all Serbia, becomes the members of the European Union, they'll have to align their foreign policy in respect to Russia accordingly. For example, they'll have to join sanctions against Russia. They'll have to impose visas on Russia's citizens who come to these countries. They'll have to scrap bilateral trade deals with Russia. Each of these steps is not really significant in terms of economic effect on Russia, but it will look as another humiliation of Russia in a region where Russia has some historical established ties.
The current status quos between Serbia and Kosovo and in Bosnia will not hold together. As for Russia and the United States, there is nothing either of them or both together can do to settle this right now, unless they can convince the Serbs and Kosovars to strike a deal that settles the recognition issue, and that's the central issue. All other issues are secondary.
Currently, Russia is against the settlement of the Kosovo conflict because it fears that after the settlement, Serbia will no longer be such a close ally of Russia, because it will not need Russia's support against Kosovo membership in the United Nations and generally against international recognition of Kosovo.
Frankly, at this point, if we can solve smaller problems and listen for the locals to make proposals regarding larger issues and then work with those locals, I think we'll be in better shape than if we do what we've been doing, which is to impose our views and our policies of the day on people in the Balkans who are used to great powers, who they cannot get rid of by themselves, but they can manipulate.